Today we're opening up a really fascinating file. It sits right at the intersection of, well, intelligence operations, sovereign finance, and the global race for artificial general intelligence.
It's an incredible story.
It is. This is a story about a colossal fortune being deployed with a chess player's precision, really, aiming to reposition an entire nation at the very top of the future global economy.
And the premise is just so high stakes. We are diving into a stack of source material today that gives us, I think, some really unprecedented insight into the United Arab Emirates' aggressive, very centralized push to become an AI superpower.
And at the heart of it all is one person.
Exactly. At the core of this monumental strategy is one figure who is, as enigmatic as he is powerful. Sheikh Tahnoun bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the UAE's national security advisor.
So our mission today is clear. We need to unpack the colossal financial scale of this undertaking. I mean, we're talking capital in the trillions.
A number that's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. And we need to look at the highly technical strategies they're using with partners, big partners like Microsoft. And then there's this incredibly delicate geopolitical tightrope the UAE is forced to walk. They're trying to balance this deep, necessary technological cooperation with the U.S. against their enduring vital economic ties to China. And all of this is a race toward what they see as this inevitable post-oil future that's powered by computation.
And for you, the listener, this deep dive is just crucial because the UAE is basically providing a stress test for U.S. global AI leadership and its export control policy. I mean, how should the U.S. engage with these wealthy, technologically ambitious swing states?
Right, nations that have the money and the ambition to rapidly scale up compute, but they're not, strictly aligned with Washington's political agenda.
Exactly. The fate of where foundational AI power is distributed globally really hinges on the diplomatic and commercial decisions being made in Abu Dhabi right now.
Okay, so let's start with the man at the center of all this, because the sources paint a profile that is, it's far from your typical government official. Sheikh Tahnoun bin Zayed Al Nahyan.
He's not just a bureaucrat.
Not at all. He isn't just the head of the National Security Council. He is the UAE's intelligence chief, their spymaster. And he has this striking, almost contradictory personal background. The sources really highlight that he is completely obsessed with chess and is a disciplined practitioner of jiu-jitsu.
And that combination is so significant, isn't it? I mean, think about it. Chess requires this deep, multi-layered strategic planning, right? You're thinking 10, maybe 20 moves ahead.
And then jiu-jitsu.
And jiu-jitsu is all about leverage, patience. It's about converting these tiny advantages into overwhelming control. So when you combine the mindset of a spymaster, a grand strategist, and a martial artist, you get this high-stakes, long-term approach that is now governing the UAE's AI strategy.
So this isn't just a speculative venture for them.
No, not at all. This is an organized, strategic deployment of national power.
And the power he wields is, well, it's almost unimaginable. We're not talking about a small portfolio here. He controls the financial levers that make this whole ambition possible.
The scale is, it's just staggering. Sheikh Tahnoun is the head of a sovereign wealth empire that is, and this is a conservative valuation, worth $1.5 trillion.
1.5 trillion.
Yeah. This includes massive assets under the umbrella of ADQ and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, ADAA. To put that number in perspective for you, that's roughly the GDP of a country like Spain or Australia.
Wow. So deploying capital at that level lets the UAE make these huge, non-incremental, immediate bets on foundational technology.
That's the key. Bets that very few other nations can match. It allows them to essentially accelerate the timeline of the entire global AI race.
And it's important to note, this capital isn't being managed by some distant fund managers in an office building somewhere.
No, he's hands-on.
He's being guided by a figure who has cultivated what the sources call a distinct tech guru persona. He's not just financing these deals. He's personally involved in shaping the narrative and the partnerships.
Precisely. And this position puts him directly in the command chain. It lets him bypass all the typical bureaucratic friction and, interface directly with the most influential builders in the world.
So who is he meeting with?
He has met repeatedly with the absolute titans of the industry. We're talking Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, OpenAI's Sam Altman, Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang. And these aren't just courtesy calls.
No, these are planning sessions.
These are conversations at the highest level about shaping the future supply chain of advanced compute. And Sheikh Tahnoun is the ultimate decision maker, the one controlling the massive treasury that pays for all of it.
Which brings us to the core belief, the conviction that's driving this whole strategy. what the sources call the AGI true believer thesis.
Mm-hmm.
This suggests it's not just about economic hedging. Tahnoun and several top UAE leaders are, quote, true believers in artificial general intelligence, or AGI.
And this is maybe the most important psychological piece of the whole story. The entire investment strategy is premised on the belief that AGI, where an AI can perform any human-level cognitive task, is not some hypothetical thing 50 years down the road.
They see it as imminent.
As an imminent revolutionary force. They genuinely believe that within the next decade, AI will fundamentally rewrite the rules of economic power. And the nations that have the most control over compute and data infrastructure, they will be the ones who dominate.
Well, if you sincerely believe that AGI will soon be able to do any human-level job, then investing $1.5 trillion aggressively immediately, that suddenly becomes the most rational thing a nation could possibly do.
It's not just rational, it's necessary. It becomes an all-or-nothing bet on the singularity.
It transforms the investment from, say, a speculative high-risk move into a necessary existential move for national security and for economic survival.
It does, and we see this conviction laid out explicitly in the documents around these high-profile partnerships. I mean, look at the Stargate project.
The big OpenAI infrastructure venture.
Right, which heavily involves the UAE firm MGX, which Sheikh Tahnoun oversees. The press release for that project explicitly uses the language of building and developing AGI for the benefit of all humanity. They are tying their sovereign wealth directly to the world's leading AGI efforts.
So we have the conviction, this immediate belief in AGI. How does that translate into formal state-centered policy? What's the official why behind the UAE's massive AI push?
Well, the primary motivation, at least as it's articulated in their policy documents, is economic diversification.
The post-oil future.
The post-oil future. The UAE has to secure a viable economic model aligning itself with global climate pledges while still maintaining its status as a major global power. The wealth they're generating today from oil has to transition into a sustainable competitive advantage for tomorrow.
And their vision is very specific about where that advantage needs to be built. It's not just a vague idea.
No, absolutely not. The UAE's grand vision includes 8 strategic national objectives, and Objective 2 is basically the operational guide for their AI deployment.
And what does Objective 2 say?
It's laser-focused on strengthening competitive advantage in 3 foundational national sectors: resource and energy, logistics and transport, and tourism and hospitality.
So it's not just about building fancy chatbots. It's about deep industrial efficiency. Can you give us an example? How would AI translate into an advantage in, say, logistics and transport?
Sure. Think about optimizing the massive container ports in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. AI can manage port traffic, it can predict maintenance needs on these huge carriers, and it can optimize the land-based supply chains in real time, far better than any team of human planners could.
Okay. And in the energy sector?
In energy, AI is crucial for maximizing efficiency in oil extraction, which is still their core business, while simultaneously modeling and scaling up renewable energy generation. So by applying these AGI concepts to their highly capitalized, infrastructure-heavy sectors, the UAE aims to make its core economy indispensable on the world stage through superior efficiency.
And that's how they plan to justify the huge upfront cost of all this compute infrastructure.
That's the plan.
Okay, let's unpack the commercial engine that's driving this vision. The main vehicle for this initial massive push is G42, the Emirati national AI champion.
Right.
And their partnership with Microsoft seems to be the bedrock of the entire strategy. What are the sheer dimensions of this Microsoft commitment?
The scale is just tremendous. It really solidifies Microsoft as the primary U.S. partner in the region. We are looking at a total investment commitment of $15.2 billion in the UAE.
$15.2 billion.
Just to expand AI and cloud infrastructure. And this isn't just some general pledge. The sources detail specific expenditures of over $7.3 billion planned just between 2023 and the end of 2025.
Okay, let's drill down into that $7.3 billion figure, because that tells us exactly where the money is going and what Microsoft is buying.
It's basically a 3-pronged investment. It's designed for both strategic alignment and the physical build-out. First, there's a $1.5 billion equity investment directly into G42.
So Microsoft gets a minority stake, a seat at the table.
Exactly. That's the strategic alignment part. Second, over $4.6 billion is earmarked specifically for capital expenditure on these high-density AI and cloud data centers. That's the physical bricks and mortar of the compute infrastructure.
And the third piece.
$1.2 billion for local operating costs. which shows a long-term commitment to staffing and maintenance in the region. They're not just building it and leaving.
And the G42 CEO, Peng Xiao, he called this a new standard for cross-border collaboration rooted in trust. That language feels really key, especially when you're dealing with the U.S. government's security requirements.
It absolutely is. I mean, the U.S. government essentially required G42 to pivot away from Chinese tech. And Microsoft's investment, their technological architecture, it provides the necessary assurance and framework to build that trust. Microsoft becomes the trusted custodian of the advanced U.S. technology deployed there.
Now, this brings us to what feels like the core technical pivot that explains the timing and the nature of this massive investment. And that's the shift in strategy from prioritizing AI training to prioritizing AI inference.
Yes, this is the critical piece of the puzzle.
So why is this a game changer for Microsoft, and why does it make the UAE so attractive right now?
Well, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella has, both publicly and privately, articulated this evolving philosophy on AI economics. In the early days, the big competitive metric was who could build the largest model. That meant focusing on training.
Which is the expensive one-time compute requirement.
Exactly. But Nadella's new thesis is that the capital expenditure for training is ultimately rate limited by how you monetize inference in this current generation of AI.
Okay, so training is the investment cost, inference is the revenue stream. Let's just make sure we define that difference really clearly for you listening.
Think of it this way. Training is like building a gigantic multi-million-dollar factory. It requires immense specialized resources, thousands of Nvidia H100s running all at once for months on end. Inference, on the other hand, is the process of using that finished factory to produce goods.
It's the deployment.
It's the deployment and the real-time usage of the trained AI model. So if you use GitHub Copilot to write some code, or if you use M365 Copilot to summarize an email, you are using inference.
And Nadella sees this continuous usage as the real gold mine.
Precisely. The sources quote, Nadella reportedly viewing inference as the ultimate moneymaker. He sees it as the major, enduring competitive advantage for Microsoft's Azure cloud services. He even made this compelling claim on an earnings call, stating that Microsoft's massive cloud revenue growth is driven entirely by inference.
Entirely by inference. That's a staggering claim.
It is. It's not the sales of raw compute. It's the daily, minute-by-minute use of the models by their enterprise customers.
And the source material highlights Microsoft's commitment to this strategy. They're intentionally prioritizing their own enterprise inference demand for their own Copilot services over just selling raw GPUs for other people to use for training.
It reveals a profound confidence in their own ecosystem. They're essentially saying, look, we control the end-user applications, the Copilots, the Azure services. We're going to prioritize deploying compute capacity to satisfy our enterprise inference demand because that's where the high-margin, sticky revenue is.
So they're turning away business, in a way.
The sources indicate they are literally turning away requests to sell vast quantities of raw GPUs for external training projects because they need that capacity for their own ecosystem. They want the customer locked into using the Microsoft Cloud, not just buying the hardware once.
And the G42 deal is the physical, strategic deployment of this entire inference philosophy. They're building the capacity where the money is and where the new customers are.
That's the lock-in mechanism. G42 and Microsoft are building 3 enormous new data centers for Azure in the UAE. 2 are at 30 megawatts, and 1 is a huge facility at 100 megawatts.
And to really grasp the compute power we're talking about here.
That infrastructure capacity is equivalent to nearly 100,000 Nvidia H100 chips, all dedicated specifically to running AI applications. That's enough power to service huge numbers of enterprise customers across those objective 2 sectors we talked about, logistics, energy, and so on.
And by doing this, they're leveraging the tried and true Microsoft strategy, creating network effects.
Absolutely. By establishing this immense advanced infrastructure in the UAE using Microsoft Azure, they create technological lock-in. G42's own portfolio companies, like the data center operator Cosna and all their government clients, they become reliant on the Azure ecosystem.
It's the Office Suite playbook all over again.
It's exactly that. Microsoft's goal is to reproduce the network effects that made Microsoft Office the default for businesses everywhere. But this time, the default is the AI application layer, the Copilots, and the Azure AI architecture. Once an enterprise integrates their core business processes onto that cloud, the switching costs to move to, say, a Chinese cloud provider become economically and operationally just prohibitive.
Okay, this is where it gets really, really interesting, especially for U.S. companies that are facing major power constraints at home. Why is the UAE so uniquely attractive to U.S. hyperscalers? The sources imply that if they can manage the regulatory hurdles, the UAE offers opportunities that are equally, or maybe even more attractive than, building data centers in the U.S.
It's a convergence of
What's the
factors.
secret sauce?
It really addresses the two biggest bottlenecks in the AI race: speed of construction and an abundance of reliable, clean energy. First, let's talk about execution speed and the UAE's industrial know-how. The sources point out that the UAE has this robust, mature engineering and operations base, which was largely inherited and perfected from the massive rapid development required by the oil industry.
So they're structured for centralized, rapid project deployment, something that's often missing in Western democracies that can get bogged down by permitting and, local opposition.
Exactly. There's a quote from one UAE government official contrasting their execution capacity with the West. He said, "We're part of the world that still remembers how to build."
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, but it's not just bravado. The sources back this up with a highly specific and frankly stunning comparison involving nuclear power plants.
Let's detail that nuclear power analogy because I think it's the most compelling evidence of their infrastructural advantage.
Okay, so consider the UAE's Baraka nuclear energy plant. The UAE managed to build 4 massive reactors, generating a total of 5,348 megawatts of power, and they brought them all online in just under 12 years, from breaking ground on the first reactor to connecting the last unit to the grid.
Under 12 years for 4 reactors. How does that compare to the U.S.?
Well, compare that to the United States' most recent nuclear projects, the Vogtle Units 3 and 4 in Georgia. Those 2 reactors combined deliver about 2,200 megawatts, so less than half the capacity of Baraka. Yet their construction took 14 years and famously ran over $30 billion over budget.
So let me get this straight. The UAE executed a project with more than twice the capacity in 2 fewer years and presumably without those staggering cost overruns.
That's right.
That difference in execution efficiency translates directly into a massive scalable advantage for future data center development.
It's transformative. I mean, the ability to execute massive, complex energy projects rapidly and affordably addresses the biggest existential threat to AI scale-up, which is securing consistent gigawatt-scale power. And the UAE is now forecasting a substantial excess electricity generation capacity in the coming years, specifically because of this efficient build-out.
What are the numbers for that projected energy surplus?
The forecasts are remarkable. By 2035, their projected generation capacity is expected to reach almost 30 gigawatts, 29.6 to be exact. Meanwhile, domestic consumption is only forecast to hit 23.2 gigawatts.
So that's a surplus of over 6 gigawatts.
A substantial guaranteed surplus capacity that the government can allocate directly to high-priority national projects like massive AI data centers.
And what happens if they maintain this aggressive building pace and greenlight a second nuclear plant?
The capacity just jumps even higher. Officials stated that because of all the efficiencies they learned from the first project, a second nuclear plant could realistically take only 7 to 10 years to build. If they do that, the UAE's total generation capacity could soar to over 34 gigawatts by 2035.
And this massive reliable energy surplus, which is mostly from zero-carbon nuclear sources, that's the economic bedrock that G42's ambitions rest on.
It is, and G42 is capitalizing on this. They aren't just aiming to be a large customer for Microsoft, they're planning to become a utility-scale provider of AI computation themselves.
This is their competitive moat.
This is their competitive moat.
Yeah.
A senior G42 executive acknowledged that the ability to rapidly and cheaply build this large energy and data center infrastructure could be our competitive moat. G42's goal is to generate around 5 gigawatts of data centers within the UAE,
5 gigawatts?
dedicated almost entirely to AI deployment and inference. That level of power dedicated to computation is just. It's not achievable in most Western countries under the current grid conditions.
5 gigawatts is an absolutely staggering target. What's the timeline for hitting that kind of scale?
Their timeline is hyper-aggressive, which, it reflects that AGI true believer thesis. They're not waiting for the market to adjust. They're building capacity to shape the market. Their short-term goals include 100 megawatts operational by the end of 2025.
Okay, that's fast.
Scaling up to hundreds of megawatts operational by the end of 2026. And crucially, they aim to hit multiple gigawatts by the end of 2027. And they're already extending this infrastructure reach globally. The sources note plans for facilities outside the UAE, like a massive 1 gigawatt facility plan for Kenya.
Wow. So they're really positioning themselves as a global AI utility.
That's the ambition.
Okay, this intense high-speed partnership with Microsoft is clearly a major strategic move. But the UAE's strategic culture is fundamentally one of hedging and balancing powers. They have deep, long-standing, mutually beneficial economic ties to China.
A huge trading partner.
A huge trading partner. So how does the UAE attempt to navigate this tension? And is the U.S. strategy of demanding technological decoupling actually working?
It's a very delicate diplomatic dance they're performing, and the sources give us some revealing insight into their internal logic. Multiple Emirati officials claim they fully understand that decoupling from China in the specific sector of highly sensitive AI is a critical condition for securing U.S. cooperation.
They get that it's a red line for Washington.
They get that in this field, it is fundamentally a zero-sum game as mandated by Washington.
But they want to maintain the rest of the relationship. That sounds like an extremely difficult balancing act to enforce on a massive, diversified national economy.
It is difficult. It's bordering on paradoxical. One top official was quoted being very explicit about this constraint. He said, "Working with the U.S. on sensitive technology, for that, decoupling is the right word. I think we have to do it. In that isolated part of our economy, it must be done."
Surgical decoupling.
Surgical decoupling. But they stress that. They simultaneously argue that their broader economic ties with China remain robust, describing them as being in a golden era of cooperation that's vital for all their non-AI trade and investment.
But does the source material indicate any skepticism about whether this surgical decoupling is even feasible? I mean, if G42 is an umbrella for so many companies, how do you ensure that the Chinese influence doesn't just leak through other non-AI related investments?
That is the critical point. The challenge for the U.S. is verifying sustained compliance. And the U.S. strategy, therefore, relies on wielding its ultimate leverage, the advanced AI chips that China cannot domestically produce at scale.
Right. So the U.S. is basically offering this comprehensive, superior technological package, chips, models, cloud infrastructure that China just can't match.
Yeah.
And that's the stick they use to enforce compliance in the high-tech sector.
Exactly. And to secure the necessary export licenses for advanced chips like the Nvidia H100s for these Microsoft-operated facilities, G42 was reportedly forced to undertake some drastic steps. This wasn't just a handshake agreement, it was a compliance mandate.
What were the specific, non-negotiable requirements G42 had to meet?
The requirements were highly detailed and targeted. G42 had to fully divest from Chinese technology firms. That meant unwinding investments in dozens of smaller entities that had previously been integrated into their ecosystem.
And it was physical, too.
Even more critically, yes. G42 was required to physically strip Huawei equipment from its data centers and replace it with U.S.-approved technology. This physical removal of infrastructure shows the U.S. is enforcing a strict red line on hardware supply chain integrity for sensitive AI infrastructure. And the approval of those export licenses in late 2024 served as validation that this strategy, this enforced technological choice, is, for now, working commercially.
And the U.S. is also making the compliance path easier for Microsoft, who's acting as the trusted partner, through new regulatory structures.
That's right. The U.S. Framework for AI Diffusion, which was developed by the Commerce Department, is designed to facilitate this exact kind of secure deployment. It allows U.S. companies like Microsoft to apply for a status known as Universal Validated End User status.
And that's a massive bureaucratic accelerator.
It is.
What does that status allow Microsoft to do that G42 couldn't do on its own?
It means Microsoft can deploy data centers using high-end U.S. chips globally with a single comprehensive license, instead of having to get country-specific authorization for every single shipment. For the UAE, this makes the path to getting cutting-edge compute vastly faster and more reliable through their U.S. partner, Microsoft.
So it's easier to go with Microsoft than to try to do it themselves.
Much easier than if G42 tried to negotiate individual licenses alone, which would involve stricter caps on chip quantity and usage restrictions. The U.S. is using its regulatory structure to channel technology through trusted commercial conduits.
Okay, now let's pivot to China. Beijing is clearly the target of this containment strategy. How is China responding to this? And what's the counter-narrative they're deploying against the U.S.-UAE partnership?
Well, China and its major national champions, especially Huawei, are actively engaged in narrative warfare. They are reportedly spreading the message across the region that U.S. regulatory delays in approving AI chip exports, even if they are ultimately approved, prove that the U.S. is an inherently selfish and unreliable partner.
The narrative is, Washington will always prioritize its own domestic interests, leaving partners vulnerable, whereas China offers stable, long-term collaboration without all the security strings attached.
Precisely. And that narrative is designed to exploit any frustration felt by the Emirati government over the time it takes to secure these export approvals.
And Huawei's continued, very visible presence in the region seems to reinforce their long-term commitment. They're not just giving up.
Oh, not at all. Huawei's continued influence is not subtle. They were a diamond sponsor of the UAE's flagship tech conference, the G-Tech's Global Expo. That shows they are maintaining top-tier engagement and haven't conceded regional technological dominance.
So what's Microsoft's counter-argument to that pressure?
Well, the Microsoft executive team believes they have the answer. Their argument is that once the U.S. chips are deployed and the Azure infrastructure is operational, the sheer high switching costs, the immense effort and expense required to move petabytes of data and integrated enterprise applications from Azure to another cloud will effectively lock the UAE into a U.S.-led technological ecosystem.
So they're betting that commercial inertia is stronger than geopolitical messaging.
That is the commercial bet, but the geopolitical tightrope remains. I mean, what if G42 manages to develop its own competitive indigenous models?
Which we'll get to next.
Right. It could diminish their reliance on Microsoft's proprietary models, making the compute infrastructure the only non-fungible asset. And if the U.S. then stops shipping chips, the UAE could theoretically transition to domestically produced or Chinese hardware and use that U.S.-built cloud architecture for its own models. The lock-in might not be as permanent as they hope.
Okay, so we've established that the immediate goal, this U.S.-backed, China-decoupled AI infrastructure, is moving forward commercially. But now we have to critically evaluate the long-term national security implications of this massive technology transfer. What's the structural risk the U.S. is taking by empowering an independent Emirati AI capability?
This is the billion, or rather trillion-dollar question.
Let's start with the central security compromise, data sovereignty. You have U.S. cloud services running the infrastructure, but the UAE government needs absolute assurance that its sensitive data cannot be accessed by foreign governments. So how does the technical architecture address the vulnerability posed by U.S. laws like the Cloud Act?
It's a highly nuanced technical and legal solution. The core deal mandates the development of a sovereign cloud, tailored specifically for the UAE government. It uses Microsoft Azure's platform, but integrated with G42 Cosna data center capabilities. And the technical key here is the deployment of G42's proprietary Core 42 software, which is built on top of Azure Confidential Compute.
Okay, let's define confidential compute for you listening. Why is that a game changer for sovereignty?
So confidential compute involves processing data inside a secure, hardware-enforced trusted execution environment, or T. You can think of it as a virtual vault for data while it's being used. It ensures that data, even when it's loaded into the server's memory, remains encrypted. It's protected from unauthorized access by the operating system, the hypervisor, or crucially, the cloud provider's own administrators.
So how does Core 42 use this to sidestep the Cloud Act?
Well, the Cloud Act allows U.S. authorities to compel U.S. tech companies like Microsoft to turn over data, even if it's stored overseas. A G42 representative explained their defense mechanism. The technical structure allows G42 to comply with the access requirement of the Cloud Act.
Meaning they could technically hand over the hard drives?
Exactly, they could hand over the hard drives or the cloud storage. However, because the data is encrypted via Core 42 and confidential compute, and the encryption key remains strictly controlled by the sovereign customer, the UAE, the data remains illegible. It's unreadable by the foreign government seeking access.
So they satisfy the legal demand for access while maintaining technical confidentiality.
It's an elegant, if complex, solution to a geopolitical problem.
That's a sophisticated technical firewall. But beyond encryption, what security controls are in place to prevent misuse, infiltration, or the eventual proliferation of this advanced capability?
G42 claims its data center security controls meet or even exceed typical U.S. commercial standards. They voluntarily adopted over 100 specific security controls from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. specifically the NIST Risk Management Framework, SP 853.
Which is the gold standard for federal information systems in the U.S.
It is. It covers everything from access control to incident response. And on top of that, G42 implements enhanced customer due diligence, focusing rigorously on know your customer procedures, especially for any entity trying to train large frontier models that could have strategic implications.
But the sources also contain a crucial note of caution from experts who toured these facilities. While the commercial implementation seems plausible, what is the long-term concern?
The concern is twofold. First, experts question whether commercial-grade controls, even rigorous ones like NIST 853, will be sufficient against highly advanced state-sponsored threats in the coming decades, especially as AI capabilities become even more powerful and sensitive.
And the second concern?
The second concern is the fundamental political risk. The delegation emphasized that U.S. officials have to maintain a healthy realism about the UAE's vested interest in hedging its bets. Let's be clear, the UAE is an authoritarian state. They have a documented history of using advanced technology for domestic surveillance and to spy on activists and dissidents.
So the fear isn't just about losing control of the technology. It's about potentially enabling a more sophisticated police state by providing them with the infrastructure.
Exactly. External viewpoints, including those cited by groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, warn that the powerful indigenous AI systems developed on this infrastructure would likely be optimized for state control and surveillance, not for democratic or open-source principles.
And that leads us directly to the long-term risk for the U.S., the push for indigenous AI models. The UAE is making this massive investment not to be a permanent cloud customer for Microsoft, but to develop sovereign AI capabilities.
They view reliance on foreign models as a fundamental security weakness, and the UAE is actively building its own models, notably G42's Arabic-English LLM called JACE, and the government-backed Technology Innovation Institute's open-source model, Falcon 2.
And how do they stack up right now?
Currently, those closest to the technology privately admit that these Emirati models perform poorly compared to U.S. options like GPT-4. They're still considered unreliable for high-end industry use.
So the U.S. still controls the quality of the models. But how are these labs structured to overcome that performance gap using all this new U.S. compute?
The Technology Innovation Institute and G42 are pouring significant investment into talent acquisition and massive compute allocation, using the very infrastructure Microsoft is building. They're hiring top researchers from all over the globe, offering extremely competitive packages, and they're benefiting from the rapid learning curve that comes from working so closely with Microsoft's deployment team.
The goal is clear.
The goal is very clear. They are using U.S. chips and U.S. cloud architecture now to rapidly iterate and improve their homegrown models until they achieve parity or even superiority.
And this is the strategic paradox the U.S. faces, isn't it?
Yeah.
The U.S. is denying China this infrastructure, but by providing it to the UAE, it's essentially equipping a future, highly capable, non-democratic competitor with the foundational ingredients needed to outgrow the partnership entirely.
That is the core dilemma for U.S. policymakers. They are providing the advanced chips and the cloud backbone that could enable these indigenous models, controlled exclusively by an opaque, non-democratic government to reach global competitiveness. What if Falcon 3, or JACE 2.0, developed entirely using this compliant U.S.-approved compute, suddenly becomes a world leader?
The U.S. would have successfully contained China.
But only at the cost of fostering a new, independent AI superpower whose interests and values may diverge sharply from Washington's. The chess match, as Sheikh Tahnoun understands, is always about the endgame, not just the opening moves.
So, what does this deep dive all mean for you? We've uncovered a multi-billion-dollar geopolitical and technological wager. It's placed by a single, highly strategic, chess-obsessed figure, Sheikh Tahnoun bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who commands $1.5 trillion and genuinely believes artificial general intelligence is arriving imminently.
He's leveraging the UAE's unique, almost unparalleled advantages in massive, fast-built infrastructure and abundant energy to entice U.S. giants like Microsoft into these foundational long-term partnerships.
And this whole narrative illustrates a critical strategic dilemma that's facing the U.S. government right now.
The choice is very stark. They can continue to fully support the G42 Microsoft partnership, creating immediate technological lock-in, cementing U.S. influence, and successfully shutting China out of key infrastructure today.
Or they have to acknowledge the immense risk of equipping an ambitious, non-democratic competitor with the precise ingredients the advanced compute, and the architectural know-how needed to develop a sovereign AI capability that will eventually render the current commercial partnership redundant.
It is the classic tension between immediate strategic containment and future systemic risk.
And that leads to our final provocative thought for you, which loops all the way back to infrastructure. We noted that the UAE's strategic edge is based partly on its massive, rapid, centralized investment in clean nuclear power, specifically the Baraka plant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while the debate rages across the U.S. and Europe over permitting, NIMBism, and the environmental cost of AI and data centers, does the UAE's rapid, aggressive, and politically centralized approach suggest a fundamental truth? Does future global tech dominance, which requires gigawatt-scale 24/7 compute power, fundamentally require a similarly massive, decisive national commitment to nuclear energy infrastructure?
A commitment that decentralized democratic bureaucracies may simply be too slow or too divided to achieve.
Exactly. Think about how the speed of political decision-making in capital projects might just become the ultimate differentiator in the global AI race.